Timeline of events. Dating 17 years ago, married 14 years ago, emergency custody order, mental health commitment 16 to 7 years ago. Testosterone replacement therapy, TRT, started 2.5 years ago, wife pregnant early in 2023, friendship with woman in late 2023, lied about it for 3 or 4 months. Wife started personal therapy a year ago, we tried marriage counseling 4 months ago, it lasted a month and she told me to cancel it, then got mad when I canceled it. I've not tried to downplay my part. Lying is always wrong, and lies by omission are lies, without a doubt. Relative to the emergency custody order, ECO, temporary detention order, TDO, custody hearing, wife had an episode spanning several days. I petitioned for the ECO, it was granted. Then, she was held on a TDO for inpatient treatment for 4 days. When she was released, with a diagnosis of bipolar, she stayed gone for a week or so, living with her sister-in-law. In that time, she managed to get an emergency hearing with the local judge for custody of our children. After hearing her side of it and her outrageous claims, the judge ruled in my favor, granting me sole custody, with my wife being allowed supervised visits at my discretion. I asked her who she would be comfortable supervising the visits, and she chose her mother. I never once denied her a chance to visit and imposed no restrictions or limits on the time or duration of those visits. After hearing my wife for 30-40 minutes, the only questions the judge had were whether or not I suspected drug use. My wife testified in court that she was going to earn $700,000 a year selling cars, quit her job where she'd recently received a very long-awaited promotion, and she was going to write a book and start an orphanage. She made a series of horrible financial decisions that put us thousands of dollars in debt that I allowed because I thought it would make her happy. I have gone through her phone maybe 5 total times in 17 years, and 2 or 3 of those were incidental to something popping up and me just scrolling a little ways up through a conversation. The number of times I have gone digging is maybe 3 times. I went through the counselor messages because I wanted to better understand my wife's thoughts, so I could figure out how she wants to be loved. I suggested marriage counseling, and she wanted to go. She got mad one night and told me to cancel the next day's session. It was already a tight schedule, so I canceled and rescheduled for the following week. She went off on me and told me I didn't care about our marriage. She says things, then when I point out what she said, she'll literally tell me, I didn't mean it like that. If I did, I have said it like this, with a slightly different emphasis. When I question what she means by something or express that I don't understand what she's wanting, she gets defensive, shuts down, and tells me it's not her job to communicate her feelings in a way I understand. Maybe I'm controlling, but I don't think so. Up until recently, I've made more money than my wife. She picked and purchased our first home while I was overseas without me even seeing it. I thought that showed great trust in her judgment. She's picked every vehicle we've bought, with the exception of 3 motorcycles I've owned, with almost no input from me. She has girls' nights when she wants, which have dwindled after children and with new job responsibilities. I left the military for her. I decreased my hours at work when she complained that I worked too much overtime. I even designated driving DD for her when she wants to go to the friends' houses, where she vents about our marital problems, because I don't want her to feel stifled or controlled. She keeps friends who are gay and have openly admitted to having a crush on her, and has even gone on private overnight beach trips with them. Usually I go with them, but once or twice they've gone a day early. She went to Vegas on a work trip last year. She has her own credit cards, buys whatever she wants, and I'm halfway through building a house with my own hands that she helped me design. If it seems I've minimized, then I apologize. I've tried to be straightforward in my answers in the comments. Painting my wife in a bad light to get people to agree with me does me no favors, and certainly wouldn't save this marriage. Maybe I had an emotional affair. By my definition, it wasn't. I've never held the position that men and women can't be friends unless they're attracted to each other, but most people disagree. As for hiding the communication, I planned to bring it up. I just kept kicking the can down the road until it was a much bigger problem than it had to be. I should have been a man and either not responded to said woman or just told my wife about it. My wife can't point to a single inappropriate message in any of the messages. Her biggest complaint was the frequency, which was several conversations a week. And I stress I do not sit on my phone at home, so it's not like I was ignoring my wife to invest time in another woman. But hey, if the consensus is that's an emotional affair, then certainly I'll accept that the lying and the communication itself were equally bad. I'm no saint and don't pretend to be. Still, I wish my wife had been upfront in saying she wasn't okay with it, instead of befriending this woman and her husband and children for another year, then just deciding that we were too close. And I think my willingness to stop as soon as she told me how she really felt should be worth something. My wife and I have 2 children, a 7-year-old daughter and a 13-month-old son. We both work a lot, and she is a good mother and would describe me as a good father. My wife found out that I had become friends with a female that I'd trained and mentored without informing her. My phone stays unlocked, and our communications were not covert or hidden, and were almost exclusively email, work and personal, Facebook, text. I just didn't volunteer that I was talking to this woman. We go to a mutual gym, so I'd see her sometimes in a public setting, and occasionally we'd get caught up in shop talk, and I may linger for a time, but never at times that my children were out of school, daycare, or my wife was off work. My wife, after finding out, tried to befriend this woman and her husband and invited them to our children's birthdays, etc. Ultimately, my wife began to think that the woman was interested in me romantically and wanted me to cut contact with her, which I resisted. During these conversations, I'd ask my wife if she thought I would cheat on her or leave her for this woman, and she said no, but that it could eventually happen, and that she just wanted me to be transparent and guarded. Finally, in one explosive episode, my wife told me that I'd probably had intimacy with this woman. I asked her if she felt that way, and she said yes. I immediately stopped talking to this woman. She texted me once or twice with random stuff, and then finally asked if I was purposefully ignoring her. I left her on read, and my wife replied a day later to her on her own phone that she had never been comfortable with the whole thing and that she would prefer her not to reach out to me again. The other woman simply said she understood and would respect that decision. And that was the end of that. During this time, my wife and I began relationship counseling that I picked out. And she has been seeing, via phone, a regular therapist for almost a year now. On top of this, around the same time, my wife discovered that I'd started taking prescription TRT without telling her. I decided to start it because I felt my wife would use it to discredit my feelings on things. So, I figured I'd wait a year and tell her so I could point out that she hadn't noticed previously. So, 2 acts of deception on my part that I'm not super proud of. Before this year's events, our other major source of conflict came when my daughter was 9 months old. My wife was manic for 4 days, nearly fought her mother and best friend, and was ultimately involuntarily committed to an inpatient mental health hospital for several days, then discharged with outpatient services and a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. During that period, she said horrible things, made awful financial decisions, and acted in a way that led every friend and family member who knew her to question her sanity. I obtained an ECO for her after being instructed to by her physician, and then she was evaluated by independent evaluators and held for 4 days. When she got out, she was still fairly erratic and left me, threatening to take the children. She convinced a judge to have an emergency hearing, and after listening to my wife rant and rant, the judge awarded me sole custody with supervised visitation at my discretion. After a few weeks of living with her sister, my wife decided to come home. For a few months after that, anytime I challenged her or set a boundary, it would lead to an explosive argument, and she was telling me she couldn't do this anymore, and she'd leave. She'd stay gone a night, then come back. The last time she did that, I told her if she ever left again, that she wouldn't be welcome back. I mention this period because I've recently realized that it led to me avoiding conflict with my wife out of fear of her leaving. My wife went from writing me unsolicited letters about how great I was to her and how spoiled she was to telling people I held her on a bed, and she had to fight me off that I punched a refrigerator and was the most controlling person alive in the span of 2 days. I'm 250 tambriters and literally teach other men how to physically restrain other grown men for a living, and my wife weighs 105 beers. I also have pictures of the refrigerator with a noticeable lack of dents. None of that really matters, but I mention it to say that I feel like she never really came home to me after this. She never apologized for any of her actions during that period, which didn't matter but would have shown some regret for how it all played out. But more importantly, she never forgave me or tried to understand why I obtained the ECO. Prior to the ECO, my wife and I didn't air marital laundry out to people outside the relationship, aside from one mutual friend couple when we were both present. After the ECO, my wife routinely told her friends about our arguments, but downplayed significantly her contributions. When asked why she felt the need to do so, she said it was because before the ECO, no one knew how she really felt, and that she wanted to make sure she had people on her side if it ever happened again. I only learned this when I was using her phone, and a message popped up from a friend, which led to me reading the whole thread, which I'm not proud of. In that thread, we'd had an argument the night before, and my wife threw a picture frame, breaking it and cutting her hand on the glass. She'd also poked me and slapped me and screamed in my face, calling me condescending, emotionless, and a number of other things. This was while she was pregnant with baby number 2. And when I asked why she had wanted a baby but was now talking about leaving, she replied that she didn't need me in her life to raise a baby. She spent like 5 paragraphs talking about how horribly I talked to her in the argument. In a single sentence mentioning cutting herself on the picture frame, she broke in anger. Also, I should mention that I thought we were finally in a good place relationship-wise, so I agreed to have another child with her, but then everything went downhill after she got pregnant. As recently as a few weeks ago, I learned she was talking about our relationship problems with a number of my friends' wives from work. And when I asked her why she felt the need to do that, she reiterated her reasoning from the ECO, which leads me to believe she never really forgave me for it. Last bit of information, she's also had a male therapist for a year, and in an effort to understand why she's acting the way she's acting recently, I went through her messages. In a thread with her therapist, I found a message where he told her he would advise following through with leaving to show me that she's serious about it if my behavior continues. I feel it's inappropriate to give relationship advice as an individual therapist, but it reinforces the idea that she has painted a horrible picture of me. I've offered to sit down and discuss adjusting work hours so she doesn't feel like I work too much, and I had committed to relationship counseling with her, both prior to her getting an apartment. She told me last night that she believes this will show her what I'm willing to sacrifice to keep her in my life, and that it will make me stronger. My wife has now gotten an apartment and said she plans to move out for 3 months, and she's supposed to leave tomorrow. I know I've violated some trust. I know I've tolerated abuse from her in the past. I've been yelled at and screamed at so loud neighbors could hear from outside the house. I've been attacked by her, etc. Most of that was when we were younger, and I understand we both came from broken homes, so we have to kind of reparent each other. But I can't see how a 3-month separation can fix anything. I feel like after the ECO, I couldn't set any boundaries with her because she'd leave. I feel like this will solidify in my mind that the relationship will never be equal and that she's only doing it to assert control over me. I don't know if I've explained all of this properly, but I'm really just wondering if anyone thinks there's a chance that 3 months of separation can be a good thing, and if it's reasonable for a person to do something hurtful to their spouse with the intent of correcting behavior or testing their love. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Discharged with outpatient services and a diagnosis of bipolar. Is she taking medication for her bipolar? Is she seeing a psychotherapist? Maybe you just didn't include it in the post, but it doesn't sound like there is any sort of treatment happening here. Comment 2. She has a mental illness. You need to protect the children. She needs a psychiatrist to manage her disorder, and she needs to stay on her medication. People with bipolar disorder can often resist this, as there are a lot of downsides to the medication. Now, for the update. Thanks for sticking around for this update. So, she moved out, packed her bags, and took some of the kids' stuff too. Said it was just for a little while, to clear her head and figure things out. I didn't stop her. I thought maybe space was what we needed. But then, the bomb dropped. She took our son and enrolled him in a new daycare, near her new place, without telling me. I found out when I went to pick him up from his usual spot, and they said he wasn't there. My heart sank. I felt betrayed, angry, and scared all at once. I confronted her about it. She said she did it because she thought I wouldn't agree to it otherwise. She was right, I wouldn't have. But that's not the point. She went behind my back again. It felt like a replay of all the times she'd made decisions without considering me, like when she'd talked to her friends about our private life. It's like I'm not even a part of this family to her. I did something I'm not proud of next. I went to the daycare and made a scene. I demanded they release my son to me, that I was his father and had every right. They refused, said they needed authorization from both parents. I lost it. I yelled, I threatened to call the police. It was ugly. I'm not usually that guy, but I was desperate. They ended up calling her, and she came down. We had it out right there in the parking lot, in front of God and everyone. She accused me of being controlling, of never listening to her. I shot back with every mistake she'd made, every time she'd gone off the rails. It wasn't my finest hour. But in the heat of that argument, something clicked. She broke down, admitted she was scared of losing me, of losing us. She said she felt like she had to do something drastic to get my attention. I realized then that this wasn't just about the daycare or the separation. It was about us, our marriage, and how broken it had become. We decided to go to a new marriage counselor, someone neutral. It was rough, digging up all that history, all the resentment. But it was also a relief, like lancing a wound to let it heal. We talked about the ECO, about her bipolar diagnosis, about how we'd been tiptoeing around each other ever since, afraid to set off another bomb. The counselor suggested something radical, a reset. Start over, date each other again, rebuild from the ground up. It sounded crazy, but we were crazy enough to try it. We've been having dinner dates, taking walks, talking like we used to when we first met. It's not perfect, but it's a start. But then, another curveball. She's pregnant again. We weren't planning this, not with everything so up in the air. It's scary thinking about bringing another child into this mess. But it's also made us more determined to fix things. We can't keep going on like this, not with another baby on the way. So here we are, 2 weeks into this reset, trying to find our way back to each other. It's not going to be easy. There's a lot of hurt, a lot of history. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like there's hope. We're talking, really talking, and that's more than I could have said a month ago. Thanks for reading. My brother-in-law moved in and started snooping through my stuff. So I changed the locks, and when he took my car and crashed it, I kicked him out and maxed out his credit card to teach him a lesson about privacy and boundaries. I, 36-year-old male, live in a house with my wife, 2 children, and mother-in-law. A week ago, my brother-in-law, 27-year-old male, moved into a room on the other side of our house with a separate entrance. A couple of days ago, I was taking a nap with my kids in the afternoon. I got up and saw my brother-in-law on our side of the house, in the bathroom I normally use, looking through our drawers. I asked him what he was looking for. He said he just needed some floss, and I gave him some before he left. I sent him a message telling him not to look through my things and to ask if he needs anything. He messaged me back saying he understood, and I added that I really dislike it when people go through my things without asking, because his mom does this. She is constantly going into my room and moving and taking things when I leave the house or am preoccupied. He replied, "No way, I can't believe she would do that." At this point, I thought we had an understanding. 2 days later, I was at work. In the afternoon, I saw my wife leaving the house with her mom and the kids. A few minutes later, I saw my brother-in-law on the security camera going into my home office and bedroom, looking through my closet and pulling out boxes. I was livid. I asked him what he was doing, and he replied that he wanted to show his friend how messy the room and closets were. I told him that he violated my privacy and broke my trust, and he's no longer allowed on our side of the house without me or my wife present. There is a sliding pocket door that can block his access to the kitchen and our side of the house. I went to the hardware store that night and installed a sliding lock to prevent him from entering the kitchen and our side of the house. Now, for the past few days, I lock the sliding door every time I sleep or am away from the house. My wife didn't say much when I told her what happened. She said he is just a nosy person. I feel bad every time I lock the sliding door, but after I think about it, I think to myself that he brought this upon himself. This has been taking a toll on me. I think about the door being locked a lot throughout the day, and sometimes lie in bed at night thinking about it. I'm sure that I cannot keep this up forever, and it is unlikely he will be moving out anytime soon. What should I do now to keep the peace between my brother-in-law and me and find some inner peace? Background info. My brother-in-law has finished college with a 4-year degree, but has never had a job. 10 years ago, my wife and I bought a house together, and my brother-in-law moved in with us along with my mother and my mother-in-law. Within a few months, I found that he was physically pushing his mom for whatever reason. When I told him he shouldn't be doing that, he flipped out, packed his things, and moved in with his aunt, where they were living previously. Since then, we haven't talked to him much. My wife would reach out to him every once in a while, but it didn't seem like he was responsive. Fast forward to about 1 year ago, my brother-in-law has been very responsive to my wife reaching out, and he is asking her to help him find a job and help him get used to driving a car again. They were getting together almost every week to practice driving. She spent an hour driving the car to him and back and another hour letting him drive, usually. About 3 months of this, and we began to go out to eat together. And he is at our house applying for jobs. We found out that he's running out of money to pay rent to his aunt. My wife and I bought a house and offered him a place to stay and find a job, rent-free. His only responsibility is to help out with some chores, look for a job, and get his life on track. My brother-in-law moved in recently. I caught him snooping around my things. I told him to stop, and he did it again. I barred him from entering the kitchen and our side of the house anytime I am sleeping or away and feel guilty. Looking for advice to get past this event and stop feeling guilty for barring his access to the kitchen. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. You are more patient than I would be. I would have asked my partner to have that relative moved out if they did something like that twice. Unacceptable. It's important to feel safe in your own home. Comment 2. You haven't done anything wrong. Your brother-in-law is in the wrong here. He's 27. He should know that snooping through other people's belongings is wrong. Now for the update. Thanks for sticking around for the update. So, things have gone from bad to worse. Remember how I installed that lock on the sliding door? Well, it turns out that was just the beginning. My brother-in-law, let's call him Snoop, decided that boundaries were just suggestions. He took it upon himself to borrow my car while I was at work. Said he had an interview, and it was an emergency. Only, there was no interview. He went joyriding and ended up scratching the bumper. When I confronted him, he shrugged it off, saying it was just a car and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. My wife was caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace, but her attempts were like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. It didn't help that my mother-in-law was whispering in her ear, defending Snoop's every move. She had the nerve to tell me that families should stick together no matter what. I couldn't believe it. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, one evening, I came home early to find Snoop in a heated argument with my wife. He was demanding money and saying we owed him for all the chores he'd done around the house. I lost it. I told him he had to leave, that I couldn't take his disrespect any longer. My wife cried, begging me to reconsider, but I was firm. Snoop packed his bags and left that night. But here's where I made the wrong choice. In a moment of anger, I told my wife that if she didn't agree with my decision, maybe she should go too. I regretted the words the moment they left my mouth, but the damage was done. She stayed, but things between us have been strained ever since. The aftermath was a house divided. My kids didn't understand why their uncle suddenly disappeared, and my mother-in-law barely spoke to me. She moved around the house like a ghost, a constant reminder of the rift I'd caused. Just when I thought we could move on, Snoop showed up again. This time, he had a sob story about being evicted and nowhere to go. My wife, with her big heart, wanted to give him another chance. Against my better judgment, I agreed, but with strict conditions. He nodded along, but I could see the insincerity in his eyes. No sooner had he moved back in than I caught him in another lie. He'd been using my wife's credit card without her knowledge. Small charges at first, so she wouldn't notice, but then larger ones. When the bill came, it was like a punch to the gut. I felt betrayed all over again. I confronted him, and this time, there was no remorse. He said he needed the money and that we wouldn't miss it. That's when I realized he hadn't changed at all. He was a leech, sucking us dry of not just our money, but our peace of mind. I told my wife everything, and this time she agreed. Snoop had to go for good. We changed the locks, canceled the credit cards, and sent him on his way. It was a hard lesson, but it had to be done. Now, we're trying to rebuild. My wife and I are working on our relationship, and my mother-in-law is slowly coming around. The kids still ask about their uncle, and it breaks my heart to see their confusion. But I know we're better off without him. Thanks for reading. My fiancé planned to dump me on vacation after 7 years together. But I found out and left them alone and heartbroken in paradise. We have been together for 7 years. During our relationship, we have had trouble with intimacy. I have a much higher drive than him. We have faced some sex-related trauma. We worked past it as best we could. After about 5 years of being together, his drive was so low that he could not care less whether we had intimacy at all. I refused to be in a dead bedroom, so we talked and made a compromise to have intimacy once every other weekend. This totals to about twice a month, which is much better than nothing, so I am happy. This has been working for us. We do not live together, and we don't spend nights together as his apartment is extremely small, and I rent out of some old lady's house, so no overnight guests. We don't go away often. We are going on vacation in August, where we will be staying in an Airbnb for 5 days. We will be attending a weekend event and visiting some friends. I was randomly thinking and figured this would be a good opportunity for us to have intimacy twice. I love morning intimacy, and we almost never get the chance to have it. I asked him the other day if we could do it twice during the 5-day vacation, suggesting our regular night intimacy, and then morning intimacy another day. His first reaction was to look at me and say, "Twice?" in the most shocked way ever. I said, "I thought since we will be on vacation and able to sleep in the same bed and things will be special, you would want to make love to me a little extra." He replied, "I didn't think that sex was going to be the main point of the trip." That crushed me. I'm even willing to not have intimacy for a month, just so we can have it twice in 1 week. Is it unreasonable to want intimacy twice in 5 days while on a special vacation overnight with my fiancé, who I never get to sleep next to? I feel very shamed and like I'm asking for way too much. Edits because I keep seeing the same comments. 1. We don't live together. I'm in school working towards a master's degree. I pay $350 a month in rent, a $50 car insurance bill, a $50 phone bill, and food/gas essentials. He pays $750 in rent, plus all his bills. We cannot afford a rent higher than $1,000 with everything included. Nothing around here is that cheap. I am literally a dirt poor college student. We have spent 5 or more days a week together for 7 years, so it's not like we don't see each other often. 2. We are both satisfied with the frequency of the intimacy. We tried every week and it was just too much for us. It would be nice to throw in a random time sometimes, which we do, but not often. No one is forced to do anything when they don't want to. We came to a compromise after we went through a dry spell of a few months when I put my foot down and told him I needed the intimacy. No, it's not spontaneous, but we go on dates either before or after the intimacy to spice it up. We both enjoy the intimacy. It's not like he hates it, LOL. 3. I have borderline personality disorder. Say what you will about the disorder. I am in therapy and on medication and have been for years. I currently do not meet the criteria for BPD, so technically, I am in remission. That being said, I struggle with the parts of BPD that can't be treated with meds. I have a strong fear of abandonment, and my fiancé is my favorite person. I love him with my whole heart. He is my best friend in the whole world. I spent 7 years with him. It is simply harder for me to leave toxic situations. I'm working on it with my therapist. 4. I will not comment on what the intimacy trauma is to protect our privacy. Just that there was damage on both sides. No intimacy abuse of any kind for either of us. Rough things that we have had to get through together that is mostly resolved at this time and does not interfere with our current intimacy life. It is only relevant to give backstory as to why I am so unsure of myself and my feelings in this moment. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. What is unreasonable is why two people in love and planning on marriage are not sexually compatible. You cannot change him, and he cannot change you. Intimacy and intimacy should be joyful, not a duty on a schedule. Please go into counseling. If you love him, let him go. That is my advice. For your own sake, for his sake. You are both too young to waste time on a relationship that has no passion or intimacy. Comment 2. You're sexually incompatible. He's not doing it to slight you, and you're not doing what you're doing to pester him. You're not unreasonable for wanting intimacy twice on a 5-day vacation. Want intimacy as much as you like. But you're unreasonable to expect it from a person who doesn't want it that much, which is what you have. Now for the update. Thanks for all the comments on my last post. Well, things took a turn for the worse. Remember how I was hoping for a bit more intimacy on our vacation? Turns out, my fiancé had been planning to use that time to break up with me. Said he'd been feeling trapped and that my expectations were too much for him. I was blindsided. I mean, we had our issues, but I thought we were working through them. After he dropped that bomb, he admitted he'd been seeing someone else. Someone who, according to him, didn't pressure him for intimacy. I was devastated. Not only had he been unfaithful, but he also made it seem like it was my fault for wanting a normal, loving relationship. I felt like a doormat, just lying there while he walked all over me with his excuses and blame shifting. I didn't know what to do. I was angry, hurt, and felt so betrayed. But I couldn't afford to move out on my own with my school expenses. So I stayed at the old lady's house, trying to pick up the pieces of my life. Meanwhile, he flaunted his new relationship like it was nothing. But then, something unexpected happened. His new girlfriend reached out to me. She was feeling guilty and told me she didn't know he was engaged. She ended things with him, saying she couldn't be with someone who treated people that way. It was a small comfort, but it felt like a tiny win in the sea of losses. I was still struggling, though. I had to see him at our mutual friends' events, and it was like he didn't even care about what he'd done. But I kept my head high, focused on my studies, and leaned on my friends for support. Then, another twist. One of our friends, who I'd always thought of as just that, a friend, confessed he had feelings for me. He'd been waiting for the right time to tell me, not wanting to interfere with my relationship. I was taken aback. I wasn't ready for a new relationship, but his honesty and timing were like a breath of fresh air compared to my fiancé's deceit. I told him I needed time, that I was still healing from everything that had happened. He understood and said he'd be there when I was ready, no pressure. It was the complete opposite of how my fiancé had been treating me, and it made me realize that I deserved better. So I'm taking it one day at a time now. I'm focusing on my therapy, my studies, and rebuilding my self-esteem. It's not easy, but I'm determined to come out of this stronger. I refuse to let my ex-fiancé's actions define me. I'm moving forward, slowly but surely. Thanks for reading. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.